All right, it's Tuesday here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. You all know the deal. You all know what we say. You could probably repeat it right now if you listen to these things often enough or hear me do these things often enough, either our live streams or these Morning Pitt videos. You know that I say it's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. And, of course, message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. Your closest Pitt fan friends, they're all right there at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So go check it out. If you want to stay up to date on the latest Pitt news, you can find it right there at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, our video wing here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Post a new Morning Pitt video every day of the week, Monday through Friday. Just 15, 20, 25 minutes, however long it takes to break down the news of the day or whatever topics are rolling around in my head, at least, as it relates to Pitt. And look, I'm pretty much like you. I just sit around and think about Pitt all the time. I mean, maybe you don't think about Pitt all the time, but that's kind of what I do, just sort of thinking of things to write about and content to come up with. I mean, we got our list of content here. This sheet will be filled by the end of the week. You know, planning out what we're going to write about, what we're going to do, what we're going to talk about on Panther-Lair.com. So I'm going to pretty much think about Pitt all the time. For better or for worse, we could have a conversation about mental health right now, probably. And so I take a few minutes every day to talk about it here on the Morning Pitt. And I feel like it's a little talk show to get your day started with some Pitt topics, give you something to talk about with other people that you might run into, other Pitt fans you might run into during the day. So while you're here, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. The like button's easy to see. It's a giant thumbs up. And the subscribe button is a little bit harder to see. It's right down there, a blue rectangle on the yellow.com area. Click that thing, turn on your notifications. You can get an alert sent to your phone whenever we go live for one of our live shows, usually Wednesday nights at 8:30 p.m. right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Or tomorrow, we'll be live after the game. Pitt playing the winner of today's Florida State-Georgia Tech game. That game is at 2 o'clock today, I want to say. Pitt's game tomorrow is tentatively scheduled to tip off at 2:30. That'll depend on how late the noon game goes. And Pitt will play the winner of that Florida State-Georgia Tech game. Let's say the game starts at 2:30. I don't think it will, but let's say it does. We'll probably go live for the post-game show around 5 o'clock or so. That should be when we go. But I don't know a specific time until we find out what time the game ends. So if you want to make sure you don't miss it, click subscribe, turn on notifications, and you'll get an alert sent to your phone when we go live. And then you won't miss any of the post-game show. It should be lively and interesting no matter what happens in the game. I'm holding out hope that we do tomorrow's post-game show and we do another one on Thursday because they win and advance to play Duke on Thursday. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Talked a lot yesterday about Pitt's path in the ACC tournament and what they need to do and what they can do, how they can help secure themselves a spot in the NCAA tournament, what this week is going to look like in Greensboro for Pitt, and what their chances are of playing somewhere next week, playing in the NCAA tournament next week for the first time in 7 years. And so we won't as much break down the matchups with Florida State and Georgia Tech. And I mean, quite frankly, you've seen Pitt play against Florida State and Georgia Tech twice each. They've played 4 games against these teams. They've gone 3-1. They swept Georgia Tech and, of course, lost at home to Florida State, won the rematch in Tallahassee. Today, it's about what happened yesterday. Last night, more specifically, the ACC announced its end-of-year awards for the 2022-2023 regular season. And there were some. So Pitt claimed 2 major awards and got 2 guys on the all-conference teams. And the 2 major awards that they claimed should have been, and ultimately, ended up being total locks. Because that's what it should have been. It should have been a lock to give 6th Man of the Year to Nike Sibandi. And it was. He got 47 votes out of a possible, I just looked at this number, 75. 47 out of 75 votes. Nobody else got more than 8 because he was clearly the 6th Man of the Year. And even more to the point, the lock of all of these votes was and should have been Coach of the Year for Jeff Capel. 57 votes for Capel. Jim Larrañaga got 8 votes. Brad Brownell at Clemson got 6. Kevin Keats at NC State got 2, and Tony Bennett got 2. And look, you want to run down that list. Miami won the ACC. I have to think that of the 8 votes for Larrañaga, at least 6, if not all 8, just said I'm voting for whoever wins the conference as Coach of the Year. Because otherwise, I mean, he did a fine job. He coached the team that won the ACC. Brownell and Keats were the two guys that I thought were in the closest competition with Jeff Capel for the longest time for Coach of the Year, because Clemson and NC State were terrible last year, arguably worse than Pitt, and they made an equally big turnaround, an equally big jump from last year to this year, and so you give him credit. And then Tony Bennett should probably just get 2 votes like every year. Like, he should just get sort of a minimum 2 votes. And then if they have a really exceptional year, you add on to that 2. It's like 2 automatic votes or something is probably what it should be for Tony Bennett, because he's just earned that distinction. But Jeff Capel takes 57 out of 75 votes for ACC Coach of the Year. And I would not have been surprised in the least if he had gotten 70 of 75 or 75 of 75, because no one in this conference deserved it more than Jeff Capel. No one. You cannot convince me that someone else in this conference deserved the Coach of the Year honors more than Jeff Capel. If you take a team from being one of the worst in the conference, which Pitt was, to being one of the best in the conference, which Pitt is, then you deserve to win the Coach of the Year, which Jeff Capel did. And you know, over the course of a season, over the course of 31 games, Pitt fans talk about a lot of things. They discuss a lot of things. They debate a lot of things. And certainly finishing the season, losing 3 out of 5, losing the final 2 in a row. There's some, well, is he really the Coach of the Year? If they're still on the bubble, can you be the Coach of the Year if you're on the bubble? Abso-freaking-lutely you can. I was actually explaining it to my kids tonight. All right, they're 10 and 8. So I'm going to explain it to you the way I explained it to them. And I think a lot of people understand this already. But, when you talk about Coach of the Year, you have to give a lot of, it has to be somebody whose team did well. It has to be somebody whose team experienced success. But it can't just, and you don't want to hold it against a coach if his team was expected to be good and they ended up being good. But there is, while we talk all season about changing expectations over the course of a schedule, and you play 30 games, your expectations aren't going to be the same at the end that they were at the beginning. But there is something to be said for, look at what this guy, there was this group of players, this roster that was expected to be X. And this coach got them to be Y, or Z or W, whatever you want to, they were expected to be here, and he got them here. And no matter what you want to say about how they finished, about the fact that they went from the number 1 seed to the number 5 seed, that they were in first place in the ACC regular season, they were a game up in first place, entering the final week of the season, and they end up finishing at number 5. You want to say that's a disappointment. You want to say that they're on the bubble. That's a disappointment. All these different things. You could say all of those, but you can't deny the fact that 21 overall wins, 14 wins in the ACC, getting back to 20 wins for the first time in 7 years, getting a winning record for the first time in 7 years, setting a program record for ACC wins, and generally just being a freaking relevant basketball team for the first time in nearly a decade. That's Coach of the Year stuff right there. It really is. And Brownell and Keats turned their programs around from last season to this season. Jeff Capel turned his program around from the last 6 seasons to this season. And 4 of those were his doing, directly or indirectly. He owns 4 of those really poor seasons. The 2 Kevin Stalling seasons, that's not on Capel. But all 6 of those seasons of mediocre to bad basketball were turned around this year. And whether you want to say it's a fluke or a flash in the pan, or I don't want to hear it, talk to me when he's done it for 2 years or 3 years in a row. He just put together this roster for 1 year. He only manufactured this 1 year of success. Let's see if he can build it. You know what? Yeah, let's see if he can build it. We'll find out if he can do it again next year and the year after. I don't know what's going to happen in 2023-24 or 24-25. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 seasons or 4 seasons. I don't know if he's going to be able to restock with transfers every year and find guys like Blake Hinson and Jamarius Burton and Nike Sabani and Greg Elliott and Nelly Cummings off the transfer pile. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that. But what I do know is he did it this year. What I do know is he put together a championship caliber team this year. And whether they finished, even though they finished at number 5, the fact that they entered the final week of the regular season at number 1 says that they were a championship caliber team. This is not a team that just, sat at the top of the conference in the first week of January and then fell, and they haven't been above 8th since then. This is a team that entered the final week of the regular season at the top of the league. They needed one win in the final week to clinch a share of the ACC title, and they were the only team that controlled its own destiny for an outright league championship. They are a championship caliber team that was built by Jeff Capel. And a lot of it ties back to things that we talked about, and I know I talked about in September, October, November. I distinctly remember saying multiple times on these morning pits, on the live streams, talking to friends and other people who follow Pitt, and I said, I don't know. I don't know what this team is going to be. I don't know if Greg Elliott can play here. I don't know if Blake Hinsey can play here. I don't know if Nelly Cummings can translate. I don't know about any of these things. But what I do know is this team is built differently than any of the previous teams that Capel has had. He's tried a lot of different approaches, and you can look at his first 4 seasons at Pitt and see different approaches each year as he tried to piece together a roster that would be competitive in the ACC, efforts that ultimately failed. And I said, but he's never had a team like this. He's never built a team like this. He's never built a team around a veteran backcourt, and 1A, a team that had shooters like this. Because, we don't know what Blake Hinson's going to do in the ACC. He hasn't played in 2 years. We don't know what Greg Elliott's going to do in the ACC. He didn't start at Marquette. We don't know what Nelly Cummings is going to do in the ACC. He's coming from Colgate. But they all seem to be good shooters, and shooting should translate. Didn't for Ryan Murphy, but nevertheless, shooting should translate. And so we looked at this team and said, okay, well, yes, Capel has failed the last 4 years. Capel's last 4 seasons were bad. I don't think there's any need to parse words here. They were bad seasons. But he came into this year with a team unlike the ones he had before. And look, I'll be the first to say, I heard all the sort of, rhetoric and rationalizations heading into each of the last 4 seasons. Okay, but this year's team is going to be this, and this year's team is going to have this, and this year's team is going to try to do this, and this year's team is going to try to play like this, and we think it's going to work because they're going to do this differently than last year's team. And so hearing it coming into this year wasn't necessarily anything different from the last year, the year before that, where we heard how it was going to be different because they were taking a different approach, because the roster was built differently. But even so, even if it felt like deja vu, this year's team truly was fundamentally built in a different way. The foundation of this team was different from anything we've seen at Pitt under Jeff Capel in terms of having that veteran backcourt and shooters. And we have to jog our memory banks, although Jeff Capel did it a little bit yesterday when he talked to the media. It was built to have this veteran backcourt and these shooters, surrounding John Hughley. That's how the whole thing was going to work and come together. And by God, the plan seemed like it might actually be a good one. They hadn't had a team like this. So much of the problem last season was the ability for other teams to collapse on John Hughley and make life difficult for him and attack him. And there was no threat outside. So why wouldn't you just, pack it in on the paint and make life difficult for the only guy who can beat you? So, okay, they went out and brought in Hinson and Elliott and Cummings. They brought in these veteran guards. They brought in this veteran backcourt, and they brought in these shooters who could maybe draw some of that pressure away. It was a good plan. And it, in retrospect, I think we could say it was executed quite well. I don't know what this team would be if John Hughley had stayed healthy and stayed in the game and not left the team or taken a break, depending on how you want to phrase it. I don't know what this team would be right now. I kind of inclined to think they'd be even better than they are, because you would have that inside-out game working, and it would be very, very difficult for teams to defend you. You'd also be better in rebounding too, which has obviously been a big issue this season and certainly was a gigantic issue on Saturday. I don't think you would get beat like that on the boards unless Hughley was in foul trouble. So they built this according to a plan. They followed a plan, put the team together in a certain way, and for that alone, I think you give Jeff Capel a lot of credit because he had a plan, he put a plan in place, and they executed it. But then you start getting into upper level stuff because you lose not 1, not 2, but 3 scholarship players. 4, really, if you count Cassius McNeely, you never made it. right? So they went from 13. They're going to have a full complement of scholarship players, and then Cassius McNeely is gone. And then Will Jeffers gets hurt. And then Dior Johnson gets in trouble. And then Hughley has his issues. And now you're down from 13 to 12 to 11 to 10 to 9. And you're playing with 9 scholarship guys, missing 2 guys, one guy who you expected to be the centerpiece of your team, no pun intended, and another guy who you expected to make a pretty significant contribution as a freshman point guard or a freshman guard in Dior Johnson. And so you weather all of that. You have this plan you've put together. You run into these obstacles, these hazards where you have injuries and you have off-court issues and all these different things that cost you like 3 guys, 4 guys, and to still turn around and win 21 games, to win 14 ACC games, to have yourself in first place in the final week of the season. If that's not a Coach of the Year performance, I don't know what it is. I don't know what counts as a Coach of the Year performance. You want to give it to John Shire for finishing the top 4? I mean, they had some injuries. Look at what Jeff Capel did. Look at what Jeff Capel did. Look at what he accomplished. Look where he came from, where the Pitt basketball program was, not just last season, but for the last 6 years. And then the adversity that he faced this season. And once they went through all that adversity with losing personnel, they start the season 1-3, and they still end up winning 21 games. They still end up in the position they're in. They still go into the postseason as a team that probably a lot of teams would say, geez, that's a tough matchup. We might be able to beat them on the glass, but those dudes jack up some threes. That's a tough team to match up against. I mean, it's a no-brainer. And he got 57 votes as Coach of the Year. Like I say, he could have gotten 70. And I wouldn't have batted an eye. I would not have been shocked at all. I think Nike Sabandi as the 6th man of the year, Jeff Capel as the Coach of the Year, were absolute locks, and they should have been. And I think the voters got it right on that one. I'm a little surprised at the Player of the Year award. And this is not to say that I thought Jamarius Burton was going to win it. The thing I keep sort of coming back to, all right, rewind the tape. Let's go to the tape of Friday morning when I wrote the 3-2-1 column on Panther-Lair.com. 3-2-1 with 3 things we know, 2 predictions, or 3 things we know, 2 questions, 1 prediction. And in the prediction, I predicted that the ACC Player of the Year will be playing in Coral Gables on Saturday night in the Pitt-Miami game. I said it was going to be Jamarius Burton or Isaiah Wong. And I kind of posited the idea that it's going to be whoever outplays the other in that game. Whoever is the better player in that game, and it'll help if they win, will end up being the ACC Player of the Year. Now, Burton definitely got the best of the head-to-head matchup. 13 points and 4 assists on 6 of 11 shooting. Wong scored 9 points. 7 of them came from the free throw line. 1 of 9 from the floor, largely with Burton guarding him. So the head-to-head matchup favored Burton, but Pitt lost the game. And Burton, while 13 points on 6 of 11 shooting is good, 4 assists is good. He only had 1 rebound. But, I mean, his stat line, I don't think, was strong enough to overcome a losing performance. Now, if the voters watched that game and were keeping an eye on Wong and Burton, and they saw the way that Burton shut down Wong, they likely would have given some more votes to Burton, who ended up with 3 votes for Player of the Year. Unfortunately for Pitt, unfortunately for Burton, Duke Carolina was also honored at about the same time. And nobody was watching Pitt Miami over Duke Carolina because it's the ACC. So I thought when that game went down, I thought that, Burton played better than Wong, but not well enough to overcome the fact that it was a loss. And Wong played really poorly in the biggest game of the season, even though his team won. And so I thought, well, it's actually going to end up being neither one of these guys. It's going to end up being, Armando Bacot or somebody. They're going to default, like ACC writers. If they're not sure what to do, they're going to just default to the Blue Bloods. They're going to default to the teams that wear blue uniforms. They're going to default, they're going to flip a coin on which color blue they want to vote for, and they're going to vote for Bacot or Filipowski. Well, Bacot only got 9 votes. Filipowski got 3. Wong ended up winning Player of the Year, which is remarkable because Burton had a better year. I think Wong averaged more points per game. I think I haven't checked the final stats yet. For the regular season. But the last I saw, Wong was averaging more points per game, but Burton had a better sort of slash line of points, rebounds, and assists per game than Wong. I'm surprised that it's split as far as it was. 30 votes for Wong, 3 for Burton. I guess, to me, it was like for a portion at the end of the season, Pitt was the number one team in the conference. Ergo the number one, the best team in the conference. And the best player on the best team, the key guy, the MVP for the best team, should end up getting Player of the Year acknowledgement, I would think. And maybe that's what happened with Wong. Miami won the ACC. They got the number one seed. They picked their MVP. Maybe that's how Wong ended up getting those votes. But I thought Burton would get some votes along the same way. Well, he only ended up with 3. Burton did end up on the first team. He was the 5th leading vote getter for the All-ACC team. Wong led voters there, along with Armando Bacot, Tyree Appleby from Wake Forest, and Hunter Tyson from Clemson. Then came Burton. Blake Hinson made the All-ACC second team. He was the 10th leading voter among All-ACC votes, or 10th leading vote getter, I should say, which put him in the 5th spot of the second team. So credit to those two guys, first team and second team honors and recognition, and very much deserving. And, for all the things we've talked about this season of like sort of remembering, oh yeah, that's what that's like. Oh yeah, that's what it's like to win 20 games. That's what it's like to be in competition for the ACC championship. That's what it's like to be one of the top teams in the league. That's what it's like to be ranked again. That's what it's like to be talking about the NCAA tournament, with Pitt involved in the conversations. We can add, that's what it's like to have some of the best players in the conference because you were one of the best teams in the league. And no matter what happens from here on out, we will look back on this season and say that Pitt, after 6 years in the wilderness, self-imposed as it may have been, truly was one of the best teams in the ACC this season. And save me all your, it was a down year or this or that. I don't care. If you were one of the best teams, you were one of the best teams. Okay? For this particular season, you were better than Carolina. There was a chance that you were going to end up with a better record than Duke. And you were going to be better than Duke. I mean, for this season, Pitt was one of the best teams in the ACC. And I think they were rightly rewarded for that accomplishment with Coach of the Year, 6th Man of the Year, first team selection, second team selection, a handful of votes for, Player of the Year, a handful of votes for, I think, Defensive Player of the Year. I think Federico got a couple of votes there. He got a vote or two for Rookie of the Year. Credit, or Most Improved Player, or whatever he ended up being. But again, when you're one of the best teams in the league, this is kind of what comes your way. And it came Pitt's way. So congratulations to all those guys. I think it was more than well-deserved. I don't think there was any two ways about it. You had to pick Capel, you had to pick Sabandy, and Burton and Hinson had to end up somewhere on the top, on the 3 All-ACC teams. Neither one of those guys deserved to be on the honorable mention. No worse than third team. And I thought, Burton should end up on first team. I'm glad to see that he did. All right, tomorrow's Morning Pitt, we will get you ready for Pitt, Florida State, or Pitt, Georgia Tech, depending on the outcome of today's game. We'll be watching that one for sure here, from the ACC tournament as it gets started later this afternoon. And then we'll preview Pitt's game tomorrow. 2:30 tip-off approximately tomorrow afternoon against one of those teams, Florida State or Georgia Tech. We'll get you ready for it on the Morning Pitt. Make sure you check out Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.Rivals.com for all the latest Pitt sports coverage, football, basketball, and recruiting. And, of course, message boards to talk with other Pitt fans. And make sure you like this video. Like is over there. Subscribe is down here. Like and subscribe. We appreciate it. And we look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow. So, if you had a good Monday yesterday, hope today is a good day. Hope you enjoy watching basketball this afternoon. This is one of the best weeks of the year, arguably better than the first week of the NCAA tournament because there are just games all day, every day, starting today. Can't wait. I'll be watching them. You'll be watching them. Let's talk about it. We'll break it all down again tomorrow on the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.